Welcome to another Resilience and Possibility webinar, workshop, gathering from the Pachamama Alliance. It is absolutely wonderful to see all of your faces. If you haven't yet, I recommend you put your screen on gallery mode at the top right. There's a view button and you can quickly scan through the brothers and sisters, the allies and friends from across the United States, from across the world joining this call. My name is Mario Trigueros. I'm the managing director at the Pachamama Alliance, and today we have a really special couple of guests. Folks who have been around the Pachamama Alliance ecosystem for a long time. And for those of you who've engaged in our programs, you'll be familiar with Drew Dellinger. He is here today, as well as Konda Mason, who has been actually crucial to the evolution of the Pachamama Alliance and to movement building in the Bay Area and beyond. We are really excited to engage in this conversation that's really looking at the intersection of justice, ecology, and spirit, in particular for an organization that works primarily with white folks. It can be a challenging place to look, and we've got two allies to really support us in doing that. For those of you joining on Facebook Live, welcome. A bunch of us are doing this on Zoom right now. And for those of us who are on Zoom, you've got a chat functionality that will be mostly available. And we've got some folks on Facebook Live also managing the chats. It looks like we've got around 180 people, give or take, about 183 people on the call right now. That's likely to increase as the call extends, and people on Facebook Live as well. So for all of you, welcome. Hope you can settle into your chairs and settle in for the next 55 minutes as we explore this conversation. As many of you are familiar, we begin our time together acknowledging and or opening sacred space. And whatever your relationship is to that word sacred, this is a moment to really arrive. Whatever you were doing, you are here now, you made it. And so it's just a moment to actually arrive and to connect to something bigger, broader than yourself. And Konda Mason, who is going to be one of the folks talking today, has agreed to acknowledge and open sacred space for us. So if you would, Konda, we would love to be invited into this space by you.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Mario. I forgot that I said I was going to open sacred space, so here I am. So, yes, so I'm going to invite us into this space right now that is, as we call sacred, that is that space that holds this energy that is something that we all are a part of, that all life is a part of, that all life is of, and that we can tap into at any point in time in our lives, any point in time. It's who we really are, the space that connects the earth and all species and all of the cosmos and all of life into this sacredness that we all are. And so I'm going to invite you in to just allow yourself to come present in this moment. And if it helps to either close your eyes or gaze downward, but to allow yourselves to come into this space, to be with each other, to be with each other in that place that we all deeply connect to. We call it Pachamama. All time, all space, all place. And as we enter this space, may we let go of anything that we don't need to carry into this space and bring our full presence, our full hearts, our full beingness that which is the best of us, the highest of us. And as we touch this space, we touch each other. And all life, on this planet and beyond. May this conversation land in that place, come from that space of sacredness. And I say, Ashe. Thank you.
Thank you, Konda.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully you're all a little more in your chairs. I also wanted to acknowledge some folks who were on here working the call. You probably recognize them. Maisa Arias is here, managing our tech, and she's our resident DJ for this call. And we've got Josh, who is Josh Wolf, who is also part of these, and he's going to be co-hosting with me. Josh, do you want to say anything to get present, to be here?
Just that I'm really excited to be on this side of the call. This is the first one of this series over the past year where I've been one of the hosts. So looking forward to contributing to the conversation with you.
Great. So let me give a little quick sort of orientation to why this call and why now. So, you know, the Pachamama Alliance's mission has been to create an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just human presence on this planet. And that trinity, that triad, those three stools, or those three pillars, have been an anchor for us. And at different times, we have leaned into one of those more than the other, but we have always needed to really stretch what social justice actually means for us. In our work in the South, the integration of those three things really shows up very tangibly. And our work in the global North, you know, there's been a lot for us to grow into. And in 2020, with the incredible breakthrough of the Black Lives Matter movement and the multiracial dimension that showed up, it was very clear for so many of us that whether it's through the Pachamama Alliance or through your own just commitment to a sustainable, thriving, and just future, that there was more for us to do around racial justice. There was more that we could contribute. There was more that we needed to see and really embody in this domain. And so we've done a lot together at the Pachamama Alliance and in this broader community to explore how do we more richly and deeply meet this moment as people committed to justice and liberation. And in particular, as we show up with, and in particular, a white cohort of folks, what is the role for this organization to play? What blind spots might we need to look at? And how do we hold each other and ourselves accountable to really meeting this moment with integrity and joy, actually, as we work on our collective liberation together. So this call is really framed around building our capacity to integrate those three pillars, and to become more embodied in our capacity to really hold racial justice in our bodies, in our spirits, and in our relationships. So with that, Josh, why don't we jump into the conversation and some introductions?
Thanks, Mario. I'm really excited um, to introduce these speakers to you. Drew and Konda have been part of the Pachamama Alliance family for years and have really been advocates for looking at justice um, at deeper levels, not only at Pachamama Alliance, but with nonprofits and organizations around the world. And so they bring a really deep and nuanced understanding, both of racial justice and also the work of Pachamama Alliance. They actually connected years ago on a journey to the Amazon. They've been to the rainforest and met with the Achuar. And they've been involved with Pachamama Alliance in a myriad of ways since then. To tell you a little bit more about what else they do in the world, Konda Mason is a social entrepreneur, earth and justice activist, and the spiritual teacher. Got a little taste of that when she opened Sacred Space. She co-founded the Impact Hub in Oakland and currently works as the co-founder and CEO at Jubilee Justice, supporting Black farming communities through new models of regenerative farming and cooperative ownership. She also works with the Community Capital Conference that focuses on building the we economy and a just transition. And she's actually been leading Pachamama Alliance journeys for many years and actually led the journey that I went on a few years ago. So it's great to reconnect with you here, Konda. And Drew Dellinger is a speaker, poet, writer, and teacher. His work addresses interconnectedness, ecology, justice, and cosmology. You might see why he got Pachamama Alliance's attention. He delivers keynotes and poetry performances around the world. And if you've experienced the Pachamama Alliance educational programs, you have likely seen his work. He was instrumental in the design of the Awakening the Dreamer Symposium and is a new board member at Pachamama Alliance. So welcome, Drew. It's great to be here with both of you. And that was just a little snapshot into what you both do in the world. Konda, I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about some of the themes that have driven your work. You've started so many organizations and been involved in a variety of disciplines, from justice, trips to the rainforest, mindfulness and yoga. What kind of underlies and connects what you focus on, and has your attention in the world today?
Thank you, Josh, for asking that. And thank you, everyone, for being here. This is wonderful. I see so many. I just have to say, shout out to a lot of good friends out here. I'm looking at faces that I haven't seen in a long time, and new friends, hopefully. So it's good to be back in community with Pachamama. It's been a while for me. Yeah, that's a good question. You know, when I think about that, I have to go all the way back to my family. And I am one of those really wonderfully blessed individuals who came from a very loving household and a very political family. And I mean, as in local, not as in running for office, but as in, you know, don't come home if you didn't stand up for the kid down the street who was bullied. You know, it was that thing. It was like always my mother was the woman who consistently was clear about standing up for those whose voices are smaller and who have less. And we were people who you would call poor. You know, we didn't have, we lived in you know, in a little matchbox house, but we were happy. And there was a lot of love. We had what I call love capital. We didn't have financial capital. And so I was driven from time, you know, I didn't have any choice, honestly. It was like if I was going to live in my mother's house, I had to, you know, and I was too young not to live in her house. And so she developed that in all of us. And so, and then I was in California and it was the 60s and I was born in, you know, in the 50s. So it was the 60s and 70s. I went to Berkeley at the right time, just when everything was happening. I was there during, you know, the whole, Haight Ashbury. And so, you know, I had a context that I would have had to be deaf, just like not hearing at all and not seeing at all, and not, in order for me to not be, to deliver. And so I did. And I had an older brother who was ahead of me, who was at Cal Berkeley, and he was a radical. And I was his project. I'd like to think. And so I just, it was bred in me to always do this, and to listen to what's needed. And so my family also came from, we had a little small farm that if we did not have that, we would not have been food secure. We were food secure only because we grew our own food. And so I always was about growing my own food. That got, put into me. The land was always a big part of the honoring of land for my grandparents and my parents. My mother, who passed away, we actually put her ashes in her collard green patch in the backyard. That's where we last left her. So that's the kind of thing that I grew up with, the land and the people, taking care of land and taking care of people. And so I did. And that's kind of the theme, I would say. I'm driven by my family, who I'm very blessed to have had in my life. And so right now I'm dealing a lot with land and Black farmers. I'm living in Louisiana, believe it or not. I have moved to Louisiana, and I'm working with Black farmers. I still have my place in Oakland, and so I'm dealing with land and justice. Justice has always been at the core, and so that's why I also, being attracted to the Pachamama Alliance, was around the Ashwar people, justice for the indigenous people, as well as the land. And so it drew me on all levels. And that's why I was connected to Pachamama. And when I look at the link, I think that's the link through everything that I touch and do: equity and fairness and justice.
Mm. That love that you talked about exudes from you. That's palpable. Yeah. Thank you.
My mother would say thank you for that. She'd be
well, we thank her. Drew, kind of a similar question for you. So many folks on this call have probably seen you in one way or another talk about movements and ecology and whatnot. Can you speak a little bit of what got you into this work and what keeps you inspired and busy these days?
Sure. Well, I really hear you, Konda, when you invoke your family and your mom. And the older I get, the more I realize how much I owe to my parents. And if you've ever heard Cornel West, speak, he often says, "I am who I am because I'm the son of," and he lists the names of his mom and dad. And so I feel like I am who I am because I'm the son of Ann Dellinger and Walter Dellinger. And growing up in the South, I was born in 1969 in North Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So the schools had only been integrated for 3 years. I mean, kind of shocking to realize. I mean, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board in 1954, but the Chapel Hill School District wasn't integrated until 1966, just 3 years before I was born. So when I was going to kindergarten in 74, 75, it hadn't even been 10 years since we had an apartheid system in the schools in North Carolina. And, I think we just respond to things we're definitely shaped by our environment, but there's also things inside us that we respond to and we recognize them when we see them. I mean, I remember in 1983 going to the 20th anniversary of the March on Washington in Washington, D.C. And, if you've had this feeling of being in a massive march in the streets with tens and tens of thousands of people. That's like, and I just felt, I was in 8th grade and I was like, this is what I've been waiting for my whole life. I mean, this is to be in a march with tens of thousands of people walking for justice, hearing rhetoric from Maya Angelou and Jesse Jackson and going like this, I want to be involved in something like this. And then a few years later, when I was probably around 17, you know, the Eyes on the Prize documentary series came out. And I remember watching, and again, hats off to my mom. She came down with the newspaper one evening and said, next week, there's going to be this series on the civil rights movement called Eyes on the Prize, and we're going to watch it as a family. It was not a question like, or do you want to watch this? We're going to watch this every Monday night. You're in the darkened, you know, living room, watching Diane Nash at 22 years old, watching John Lewis at 21 years old, you know, listening to Fannie Lou Hamer and Martin Luther King and Ella Jo Baker. And, you know, and again, being like, I want my life to be about, you know, and also just having it, you know, growing up in the South, it's like issues of racism, and really anywhere growing up in the United States of America, issues of racism are kind of heavy in the air, but often not acknowledged and talked about. And then you're watching this documentary and you're seeing these, you know, governors, you know, and people saying like, all the people of the South are in favor of segregation, you know, and you're just going like, how is this just 30 years ago? I mean, this is unbelievable. And this is so deep that, of course, these issues don't disappear with the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 65. These issues don't disappear just because Sesame Street, you know, comes on in 1969. So anyway, don't let me, I'm getting worked up already. But, and then just, you know, always drawn to that. And like, and so, but I distinctly remember watching Eyes on the Prize and going like, I want my life to be about that. But I don't even know what that means right now. I mean, obviously it's a different moment. We don't have the exact same issues, you know. All right, let me try to keep this short. But I also remember being just a couple years older and like going up to my dad's record collection, bored, like at 19 years old, going up to my dad's record collection, flipping past, you know, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Ray Charles, the Beatles, Bob Dylan, Chuck Berry. And there's this record, it's called Dr. King Speaking in Harlem. And I listened to this whole record, you know, it was a whole like 45-minute Dr. King speech from 1964. And he's saying, we have the least of these among us. Who are the least of these? They are the people who see life as a long and desolate corridor with no exit sign. They are the people at the bottom of the economic ladder. You know, I'm just going, I listened to this whole thing by myself and I was just like, oh my, it just hits you so hard. And I knew that these issues of racism that he was talking about were not done, that this was still very relevant and very present, and that these issues of economic justice were not over, that this was extremely relevant and pertinent. But again, I didn't know what to do with it, but I made an audio cassette of this album. Some of you might remember when we used to do things like that with the technology. And I took that cassette with me to Prescott College because I was like, there's something here that needs to be reckoned with. You know, and like just reading Malcolm X in college, I mean, in high school, and reading Howard Zinn, you know, when I was in my master's degree, and like, and thinking of Howard Zinn as such a powerful example of a scholar, activist, supporter of movements, and being like, how can I like shape my scholarship and my interests into something active like that? So anyway, I could go on. And then moving to the Bay Area, I'll just mention one last thing, which is moving to the Bay Area and, you know, getting involved with the Challenging White Supremacy workshops. You know, I see my friend Allie Chaggy Star here on the call, and she was involved in those as well, and learning from people like Sharon Martinez and Chris Crass how to do like high level anti-racism work from really knowledgeable and committed and thoughtful and compassionate, loving people like Chris Crass and Sharon Martinez in the Challenging White Supremacy workshop. So that's enough for now. But.
Thank you, Drew. And I also, in case folks don't know, I just want to thank you for so much of your work, but in particular, Hieroglyphic Stairway. For most of you have probably heard it. It's 3:23 in the morning. It begins It has made a huge impact on so many of us, etched in our hearts, and whatever you allowed access to inside of you to deliver that. There's just such deep gratitude. Um, I have a question, sort of getting to something, to sort of something at the core of the Pachamama Alliance, the rainforest. And for folks committed to the environment, the rainforest is obviously a key resource to manage the global climate and whatnot. And when you go there, there is a presence there, and there's a palpable entity that feels like it reaches out to you. I'd love to hear, maybe Konda, we can start with you. What does the impact of the rainforest on you? And you've returned several times. Can you give us a sense of how it informed your work, or how it reaches or uses you now?
Yeah, the rainforest, yeah, I've been many times now. The first trip I'll never forget, and the second and the third. And then I started, as you said in the introduction, I led trips to the rainforest for years back to back to back. And I'm missing it.
Mm.
It got me the very first time I was there. I knew so it begins before I even got there.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that in my life, I knew that I was going to go to the rainforest. It was just, I knew about the rainforest on the planet. It was like one of those things. And I set in my head, I would make it to the rainforest. Didn't know how. And then Pachamama came into my life. And I was like, oh, okay, this is it. This is the vehicle. And so I've always wanted to be there. And it's so deep, it's hard to even speak about the, of what life really is on the planet, this ecosystem that is, that shows us how to live. If we could only pay attention, it shows us how to be. It shows us what life really is. It shows us the depth of what living on this planet is really about. And it speaks loudly and softly at the same time. It's so gentle and so loud and so gentle. And it has this way of just grabbing you, grabbing your heart. I don't know how to put it. It is probably, it is something that once I was there, I knew that I needed to go back, and I wanted to bring people back. I always heard it was the lungs of our planet and that kind of a thing. And so that's kind of why I wanted to go see it, what could be the lungs of the planet. And I knew, of course, the trees and what they offer us. But it's a habitat of more than just the lungs of the planet. It's the body and soul of the planet. It embodies the soul of the planet and of life itself. And so, right now I'm just seeing it in my mind's eye and feeling it. And I can't describe it any better than to say that the diversity, when you look at, I took permaculture, right? And I have a permaculture design certificate. And one of the many principles of permaculture, the first one is observation. And then another one is about the, of course, diversity and what happens at edges, and everything is right there. When I'm in the rainforest, all of it just shows up and is alive. It's so alive. It's so alive. It's so alive. The sounds, I could hear the sounds. There's just, it's special.
Mm.
It is special.
Mm-hmm.
It is absolutely special. And it brings, you can't go there and not understand something deeper than you did before you went. Just another understanding happens. That's for me right now. I've never been asked that question, so I'm struggling for words because it's really not about words. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to do it because I'm on this Zoom call. But really, I would answer that question in silence. Yeah.
That was you struggling for words. I can't wait to see what happens when you have some time to think about it. That was one of the most powerful descriptions I've heard of the experience. Thank you for that. And Drew, I know you work a lot at the intersection of ecology and justice, and I'm wondering if you can build a bridge maybe from what Konda was just sharing about that immersion in the rainforest to work for justice in the world.
Sure. Well, I mean, tears are like welling up in my eyes listening to Konda. I mean, when I think of the rainforest, I think of like the heart of the cosmos itself. I mean, even beyond planet Earth, it's like you're sinking into the heart of the Milky Way galaxy, because it's these cosmological forces that are unfolding in the rainforest. I mean, this is what this universe can do when given a hospitable planet and left alone for a few billion years. And so I was very inspired and influenced by Thomas Berry and Brian Swimme and people like this who were talking about the cosmological understanding. And when I think of, there's so much that goes into thinking about the rainforest. I mean, there's issues of settler colonialism. There's issues of industrialization and the destruction of the planet. And I remember, having this kind of long-standing interest in civil rights, and then hearing about Thomas Berry and studying with Thomas Berry for, what ended up to be 19, 20 years. But when I was starting my PhD program in 2000, I remember, and, took classes, and then I had to figure out what to write a dissertation on. I remember feeling like I needed to somehow try to bring cosmology and social justice, and particularly racial justice, together somehow. And I remember that still felt a little cutting edge back then, 20 years ago. But though there were certainly people who were talking about integrating ecology and social justice. And that's one of the things you find as you learn more and study more, that there are always people doing this decades before you may have thought they were. I mean, there's a great statement I found from this group called Ecology Action East or something, that had a statement in 1970 saying, if the environmental movement doesn't deal with issues of imperialism, then it's not going to get to the roots of what, is really happening. I mean, they were saying that in 1970. So there's really no excuse for us, over 50 years later, to not be making these connections between ecology and social justice. The good news is the youth are making these connections. And I'll just give one example. There's a great climate activist I admire named Jamie Margolin, who lives up in Seattle, and she founded this group called This Is 0 Hour, or 0 Hour for short. And they've been working on kind of popular education framework called Getting to the Roots. And they say, and what they present in these workshops, I haven't seen the workshops, but I follow her on Twitter and I see her tweeting about this. And, she's saying that using the hashtag getting to the roots, or get to the roots. And they're saying the roots of the climate crisis are capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism, and white supremacy. So if you're involved in environmental work in 2021, and you're not looking at capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism, and white supremacy, you're not going to be at the cutting edge. You're not going to be up to speed with where the youth are and with what's happening. So this is kind of my challenge, and what I've tried to do when I go around and talk to different groups is that we have to be intersectional. We have to be looking at settler colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia. This is part of what it means to be interconnected. This is part of what interconnectedness is, not just an ecological or a spiritual thing that doesn't relate to social justice. I mean, I remember talking at a conference of kind of new agey-ish folks who are into spirituality and into consciousness. And I said, you know, we are so quick to talk about that through quantum entanglement, we're connected to the farthest reaches of the cosmos, but no one wants to talk about how we're connected to the Virginia slave codes of 1705. You know, that's part of interconnectedness too. So I'll leave it there for now.
There's something.
You'll be taking no prisoners, man. I love it.
Well, yeah. And there's something, you know, through that sort of profound truth of interconnectedness is access to racism. But, you know, so many of us, especially I think from what I have been working with white people, racism is this thing that exists out there. And when you come close to it, it's sort of painful, it's uncomfortable, it's, you know, hopefully you realize your role in it. And that through one of the things I feel like our community is really strong at is really grounding in that truth that I think does inform our work from the rainforest, Konda, of our inherent interconnectedness. And it isn't bombastic, and it's intimate. It's a deep, intimate knowing. Through that intimate knowing is liberation, and access to systemic oppression that I think is more heartfelt, actually. Isn't an intellectual exercise, but is actually something that when you actually sense your a real sense of interconnectedness, the sort of systems of oppression that organize us become more, you know, they become more malleable because we see that they are human created. They are not part of nature. I wonder, for either of you, to what extent how you go back and forth between the intellectual exercise of understanding systems of oppression with the embodied sort of knowing of our inherent interconnectedness. How you can go from knowing in your cells and in your bones how we are interconnected and this sense that we are all one, with also really getting the real implications and the real reality of things like racism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and the list goes on. How do you go back and forth, or how can you share with our folks how you go back and forth between those two, maybe those two sides of the same coin?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to wind this back a little bit from the beginning of what you were saying. And that is that I think that the movement towards ecology, the environmental movement, has actually played a big role in stifling people's understanding about racism and the work that they need to do, white folks that they need to do, because it's given them an alternative. It's like, let's focus on, I mean, you would think that going to the rainforest, that you see interconnection and you see how everything works together, and therefore you would then connect the dots and go out into people. But no, that's not what happens. Typically, what happens, not for everybody, but what has happened is that it's like, it gives folks a focus. Let's save the planet, okay? Without making the connections that need to be made about the people. Or if it's the people, it's the indigenous people. Let's go down there and do something around indigeneity, as opposed to like what Drew just said, you know, Virginia or next door or East Oakland, okay? They're going to the rainforest does not necessarily, then you come back and think, I need to think about East Oakland and what's happening there. It does not do that. And so I think that that is a place of escapism sometimes with this environmental movement. And it allows folks to bifurcate as if they're two separate things, as if the movement for climate is separate from the movement for justice, when it's not. It's all one and the same. It's the same mindset. It's the same problem, same solution. And it does all boil back down to what I call racial capitalism. And so I think that that connection is something that, and also it just also lends itself to the spiritual bypass, particularly this people who I consider white spiritualists, people who are on the spiritual path, who are on the ecological path, who are liberal progressives, that there's a tendency to do this spiritual bypass thing. And that is to stick with we're all one. We're just one. And so let's just kind of hang with that notion, as opposed to really looking at the truth of life, and that life is on a couple of planes, right? There's the relative plane, there's the universal plane. The universal plane, absolutely. And on the relative plane, I am a Black woman sitting in America on Louisiana on a plantation, actually, believe it or not. And all that comes with that, and all that comes with that. And so for me, I don't think that there is this going back and forth, as you said, because, and I think that that's the mindset. I think the Western mindset compartmentalizes so many things, right? And does not see the systemic nature. I mean, you really have to work hard to really recognize and take on the idea of the systemic nature of all these issues. You talked about intersectionality, Drew. They're all connected. And until we see that and know that and not bifurcate and understand that, if I'm putting input into the system here, then where did that come from? Where did that harm come from? What is the root of that harm? And then you see a harm over here. And it's like, okay, well, what is the root of that harm? And until we start, instead of stopping at, oh, I'm an environmentalist and the earth is where my passion is, because there's not an environmental issue that does not have a social justice element to it. There's not one. They're all connected. And so I think that it's really incumbent upon folks to be able to take a deeper step. I mean, I look at where we are right now in 2021 and all that has happened and where we are. It's like, I'm like, I don't have a whole lot of patience these days. I'm working on it, or maybe I'm not, honestly, maybe I'm not. But I do believe that we need to really understand, and all the organizations that are doing great work on the planet, great work, if they do not have this environment, this social justice component to a deeper understanding and taking it there and teaching their people that, and going through undoing racism and unlearning and all those things that need to happen. If that's not happening, then to me, it's just insufficient. No matter how much work you're doing, no matter how great your organization is, it's insufficient. Because at the core is the human mindset that has created everything, right? And if we've created it, we can uncreate it. And it goes back to the roots of capitalism, and it goes back to what happened right here in the South, where I'm sitting in Louisiana on a plantation. And until we get to that, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm here. I mean, I left Oakland. It's like, I need to do the deeper work now. I need to do the work that where all the harm in this country manifested first, where it dug its roots into the harm. And that's here in the South and in these states like Louisiana, where I'm sitting right now. And that's where my path has taken me to work. And I'm working the land and I'm working the people, because it's all, again, it goes back to the same thing. So I just think that when I think about, we got to get deeper in our inquiry around the causal dynamics of what has taken place in this country in particular. You know, when I think about how America has become the biggest, until now, the biggest economic superpower on the planet, it's because of the millions and millions and millions of free labor hours that my people is from the stolen land of the indigenous people, and the millions of hours that enslaved Africans had to do here, that made this the superpower. Without that African labor, free labor for millions and millions of hours, America would not be what it claims to be. And until we claim that back and understand that our individual wealth, every single person, our individual wealth goes back to that. It goes back to those free hours of labor that made America what it is. All individual wealth in America goes back to that, period. And until we come to that and we recognize that and claim that, then we're not doing really the deep work. And that's, to me, where the deep work needs to happen. And so that's the plane that I'm playing on right now. And working with people of wealth. I'm working with people of wealth right now, and people, what we call with the kind of capital, the kind of wealth that is the brain trust and the heart trust, and having people come together who would never have come together. And another part of the thing that I do is what I call journeys. And we have these conversations at the intersection of land, race, money, and spirit. Because in my estimation, when I think of land, race, and money, those are the core issues in this country. And until we get to land, stolen land, what happened to the land, race, and money, and how it all comes together and how it built America, then we are still on a top level of conversation. And so I'm going down to the root of land, race, money, and spirit. And spirit goes back to who we really are, right? That is that deep oneness, that deep interconnection, that my liberation is tied to yours. You are not going to get out of this without me. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to get out of it without you. Mm-hmm. And so that's the conversations that I'm having these days.
Drew, how do you see the environmental movement is doing? Konda just gave us a great dive into escapism, maybe distraction from the core issue, and you put it so beautifully, Konda. Thank you for that. Drew, you spoke to youth activists and what they're bringing forward in the movement. And we certainly saw in the last year a number of environmental organizations putting out statements around racism, intersectionality. I'm curious what you see in that and where we're at now.
It's hard to generalize. I mean, I think it's better than nothing. I think some of it's a little late and some of it's a little, and but I think it is better. I think we are in a new moment where hopefully we can build on the depth of understanding. I mean, I've got a lot of thoughts swirling, but let me try to sift out a few. I mean, one is if your mission is to change the dream of the modern world, to change the dream of the North, then you absolutely have to be looking at how white supremacy and racial oppression is constitutive of the, you can't separate, the whole modern nation state and the modern world is based on the system of race and racism that was developed in the 1400s and the 1500s and the 1600s. So it's absolutely integral to changing the dream of the modern world, to be looking at issues of white supremacy, systemic racism, settler colonialism, Something I want to touch on from the question before is that I try to puncture a little bit of some of the kind of affectations around and poses to be uncharitable around what is spiritual and what is not. I don't think that someone who speaks in a soft voice is more spiritual than someone who shouts. I don't think that denial and is spiritual. I think spirituality and awareness are kind of synonyms somehow, and spirituality and courage. You know, Gandhi talked about how fearlessness is requisite for spirituality. And so I think having the courage to look at the painful truths of our history and our lives and our current system and the ways in which we're complicit, that this is spiritual work. And I think that King was modeled for us how to be loving and compassionate, but also raw and real at the same time, and to call out colonialism and imperialism and militarism. And Dr. King was saying, I've come to believe that most whites are unconscious racists. You know, how can you be that real and raw and yet also be loving? And that's why we can embrace him when he goes to the raw and the real side, because we know that he's holding down the love and compassion and reconciliation side. So I think we're called to a similar thing. I think we're called to recognize awareness, getting out of denial, building justice, and implementing justice, not just thinking about it, as spiritual paths. And that then we can do this with art, and we can do it with humor, and we can do it with creativity, and we absolutely must do it with love and compassion. But there's a way in which people go like, oh, well, I don't want to be involved in anything that is mean, or, I don't want to use a negative word like anti-racism. And they think that that's spirituality. That's denial. That's not understanding a basic concept like accountability. So how can we crack ourselves out of denial? How can we understand what mature, loving, creative accountability means, and recognize these as part of our spiritual lives and our spiritual paths? And we're getting low on time, so I'll just say one quick thing is that I really encourage predominantly white nonprofit groups or schools or organizations or institutions of any kind to do this kind of consistent, ongoing anti-oppression work, anti-racism work, and that it needs to be budgeted and done in a consistent way, and really emphasized and put at the core of the mission of the institution, school, organization, nonprofit. And that there are groups to help. There are groups like the Catalyst Project. There are groups like the People's Institute. There are groups like Surge, which is showing up for racial justice. And so you should be following Surge. You should be consulting with the People's Institute. You should be hiring people, not depending on, your faculty members of color to carry this extra load in addition to their underpaid teaching work, to be on these diversity and inclusion committees, for free. You should be budgeting and paying people to help your organization get up to speed and build itself as a truly multicultural, anti-racist, openly democratic institution. And the one last thing that I'll sneak in is that I think there's a way in which people have to challenge some of the kind of get past their nonpartisan stances and call out the Republican Party for its voter suppression. And I understand that nonprofit groups and 501c3s cannot endorse candidates, but can you stand up for voting rights? Can you stand up against the disenfranchisement of Black voters? And can you figure out a way to do that and still be a 501c3? I bet you can. I bet you can.
Right on, Drew. Excellent.
Unfortunately, as Drew mentioned, we are approaching the end of the hour here. It seems like this is a conversation that could keep going and keep unspooling and deepening. And really, I'm just sitting here really just grateful to both of you for what you're bringing to this conversation, what you brought to Pachamama Alliance over the years. And I'm interested, as we wrap up, if you have a final thought, maybe for the audience, but maybe even for one another. we haven't touched a lot on your relationship, but you kind of spoke to the power of the rainforest. You were there together. You have this long history, and maybe there's something that you wanted to share to close this conversation together.
Mm. Well, I mean, I just want to say, Drew is one of the few people outside of my birth family that I call my brother. He's my brother. I was like a brother from another mother, and I love him. And we did, you see who he is. And yeah, and at a time when I was struggling with white people around me who really weren't taking seriously what social justice really meant, Drew was one of the people who did. He understood it from the core. And so, that just meant everything to me then as it does now. And as we get older, as we talked about, we getting old, Drew, we are still just, paralleling each other. And as you spoke, Amario, about his poetry is just ridiculous. And I just love him deeply. And the last thing that I want to say to everybody else on this is that what Drew said, not only just for organizations, but for individuals, do the work, the anti-racism work. It's like since the murder of that happened in Minneapolis, and we have suddenly become aware, that this is happening to Black people. It's not new. We've been telling you this for centuries, and the work needs to get done on your parts. And so the killing of Mr. Floyd is just the tip of an iceberg. And so I'm just going to implore everyone to do the work.
And I would just say on a personal level, Konda, that I would love to know how to support what you're doing with Jubilee Justice and all of the work that you're doing. So I would welcome an opportunity to support you and your work in any ways that I can.
Thank you, Drew.
Well, from all of us, we deeply salute and bow to the work that you've both done with yourselves and in community. Konda, thank you for this wonderful homecoming, coming back to the Pachamama Alliance ecosystem with so clear a message. And I want to echo what Konda said to everybody on this call. So many of us who got involved with ecology quickly learned our lifestyle choices that contributed to the global climate crisis, and we see the corporations that benefit from it, and we can attack that and go after that and change that. And the same creativity and energy is available to us in this domain of justice, of our role, of how to unlearn it, how our lifestyles are changed from it, sometimes through choice and sometimes not through choice. So there are a plethora of resources out there for people to engage with. You've seen some of them on these chat logs. You can stay tuned for the Pachamama Alliance to continue to bring these conversations. With deep gratitude to all of you. We bid you all farewell with lots and lots of love. Thank you.
Blessings, everyone.
Thank you, Konda.
Yeah, keep yourselves healthy and safe.
Likewise. Love to you and your family. Yeah, thank you, Drew.
Yes, thank you all.
All right. Bye now, everyone.
Bye-bye.